children and armed conflict. This matter is of highest priority and urgency for the State of Palestine, whose children's lives are gravely endangered by the Israeli occupation. I also thank Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Ms. Layla Zarrugi, Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict, Ms. Yoka Brandt, Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, and Ms. Eunice Apoyo, Director of Facilitation for Peace and Development, for their important briefings. Mr. President, we come before the Security Council anguished by the Secretary General's decision to exclude Israel from the list of shame of parties committing grave violations against children in his annual report on children and armed conflict. Israel, the occupying power, is without a doubt a flagrant violator of child rights. Israel systematically commits crimes against Palestinian children, its actions contravening its obligations under human rights law, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child and humanitarian law, which obligates the occupying power to ensure the well-being and safety of the civilian population under its occupation. Evidence verified by the UN and numerous human rights organizations affirms that Israel continues to kill and maim children, attack schools and hospitals, and prevent humanitarian access, with devastating impact on the rights, lives, and well-being of Palestinian children. These facts are well documented in the current report and similar past reports. According to the established criteria by the Security Council, such actions would trigger a listing among the grave violators identified in the report's annex. You qualify to be the list of shame, whether Boko Haram is there or not. If you meet the criteria, then you have to be there, not for political consideration to remove you from there because some abhorrent terrorist organization in the list. And yet, Israel was not included in that list, as political pressures were again blatantly exerted to shield it from censor and measures of accountability, in spite of the objective recommendation of the experts in the UN system, and we, in this regard, salute them for their professional and honest position, and they recommended the inclusion, but political pressure led to deleting Israel from being on the list of shame. This glaring omission and failure to hold Israel responsible for its crimes comes at heavy cost to our innocent children, who are being denied the protection of the law, their rights violated, their suffering deepened, and their lives, dreams, and futures shattered without consequences. Mr. President, Israel's brutality increased against Palestinian children in 2014, causing the third highest number of child fatalities in armed conflict worldwide. As reported, 557 Palestinian children were killed. And when they circulate my statement, there is an annex, and in that annex there is a list of the name of all those children and their ages. The majority in the Gaza Strip during the Israeli military assaults of July-August 2014, including 340 boys and 200 girls, from babies of 1 week old to 17 years old. As time limits do not permit me to read the names of all of these beloved children, to properly memorialize their lives and souls, we are distributing the list of their names with the copies of our statement today. Indeed, the Palestinian people still grieve this massive loss of human life and innocence. Among them are 19 children of the Abu Jam'a family, the youngest a 6-month-old girl, Bisan, who were massacred in an Israeli airstrike on their home that killed 25 family members in total. They suffered the same disaster inflicted on 142 families who lost multiple members mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins in such criminal assaults, with 89 families totally decimated. The grim reality is that the Israeli occupying forces killed an average of 10 children per day in Gaza, most of whom had not yet celebrated their 12th birthday. Children were killed on beaches as they played in broad daylight before the eyes of the world, in the sanctity of their homes, in their beds as they slept, in schools, in playgrounds, in the arms of their parents who could not save them from the Israeli onslaught. And an estimated 3,000 children were injured and maimed by deliberate Israeli strikes and bombardments of civilian areas. 1,000 of those children will be disabled for life. These facts, documented and verified by UN agencies on the ground, can neither be disputed nor distorted or justified by any shameless propaganda. In addition to these horrific facts, 1,218 Palestinian children were injured in 2014 by the occupying forces in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem, more than half under the age of 12, and many critically wounded, and 13 children were killed, among them Muhammad Abu Khdeir, age 16, who was abducted and burnt alive by terrorist settlers, and Nadim Siam Nuwara, age 17, who was killed as he was returning home from school during the day of Nakba in May 2014. And I'm honored to have his father with us here today as we appeal again to the Security Council to act to redress the crimes perpetrated against his son and our people, and to bring an end to this illegal 48 years occupation and decades of injustice. Moreover, along with rampant Israeli strikes on hospitals and homes, causing death and injury to children, the report indicates that Israeli attacks damaged or destroyed 543 schools in Palestine, the highest recorded number of all times. This includes UNRWA schools, where many Palestinian families, the majority refugees seeking protection under the UN flag, met a tragic fate at the hands of the occupying forces, which killed at least 42 people, including 16 children, and injured 230 in strikes on schools. Mr. President, generations of Palestinian children have been traumatized by the depravity of the Israeli occupation. As noted by the Secretary General in the report, and I quote, "The cumulative impact on children and the civilian population in general of these military operations and the ongoing military occupation in the state of Palestine is devastating." End of quotation. The average 8-year-old in Gaza has witnessed 3 major military aggressions, but has never set foot outside Gaza. Too many young lives have been cut short by the violence and terror of the occupying forces and extremist settler militants, who, along with the Israeli government, should be included in the list of violators, the list of shame. The children that survive this constant aggression are left to cope with deep physical and psychological wounds, gravely impairing their lives, including as a result of loss of family members, with at least 1,500 children orphaned in the last Israeli war alone. Detentions and arrests, with children as young as 12 seized from their beds in the dead of night, detained, interrogated, beaten, blindfolded, strip-searched, forced to endure solitary confinement and other acts amounting to torture, and prosecuted in the juvenile military court system in the world. The illegal blockade by which Israel has inhumanely deprived the Palestinians in Gaza, isolated them from the world, and obstructed humanitarian assistance and recovery. Forced displacement, endured repeatedly by many children, and the destruction of their homes and loss of their life possessions. Where else in the world would such deplorable treatment of children be permitted? How long will the Security Council allow Israel to act as a state above the law, perpetrating such grave violations against children with impunity? This shameful situation renders the law, the obligations to protect civilians in armed conflict, and the accountability mechanism established for this purpose meaningless. Failure to apply the same standards and demands for compliance to Israel undermine the credibility of the international system and prove that it is broken. This accountability gap clearly fosters Israeli impunity, as shown in its callous response to the report and the persistence of its violations against our children, who are left to fend for themselves against this Israeli savagery. As this Council knows, had Israel been added to the list of grave violators, a process of increased oversight would have been initiated. The UN and Israel would have had to negotiate a time-bound mandatory action plan to protect children. Listing would also have provided the Council with tools to prevent and respond to future Israeli violations. Israel's exclusion from the list, despite the expert advice of the SRSG and the UN agencies monitoring the situation in Palestine, is a missed opportunity to hold Israel accountable and to save the lives of Palestinian children. Mr. President, in the year 2009, the Secretary General came before the Council and stated that, and I quote, "All countries and all groups must put the protection of children in situations of armed conflict above politics," end of quotation. We echo that appeal today in light of the tragic plight of Palestinian children under Israeli occupation. Israel must be held accountable for its crimes. We are convinced that only collective international action can compel it to cease its violations and respect the law. Our pursuit of accountability and commitment to international law are evident in our accession to the Rome Statute and other international treaties. While the Israeli government continues to demonstrate in word and deed that it has no interest in peace and the rule of law, insistent on denying the Palestinian people their rights and entrenching its occupation, the Palestinian leadership remains committed to peace. To salvage the prospects for peace, we implore the international community, with the Security Council at the forefront, to act to uphold international law and UN resolutions towards ending Israel's illegal occupation and achieving freedom and justice for the Palestinian people. Until then, we again appeal for protection of the Palestinian people, beginning with our children. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement.